You guys were all on the front lines of this, putting everything on the line, putting your lives on the line, putting your lives at risk. And our government was working against you, not against the terrorists at that time, but against its very own bureaucracy that was doing exactly what it was meant to do, which was to stop these bad guys from attaining any access inside the United States and targeting Americans and targeting our assets. But you were being punished for it. I don't know how many of you have X, how many of you been watching the videos being posted by journalists, independent journalists, and others at the US-Mexico border, but the numbers and the videos are quite staggering. When you see people from all over the world cutting through fence lines, running across, stampeding through, thousands of people making their way through the border, actually tens of thousands, and nobody's there to stop them. They're only going to process them and let them go into the country. It's pretty staggering. It's also astonishing how far people are coming from all over the world, from parts of Africa, from the furthest reaches of Afghanistan, from Iraq, from other places in the Far East as well. Just showing up, people from China, a bunch of men wearing suits coming across the border from China. And it's like, what are all these men doing here? It's not like we see a ton of family units right now. Those family units are smaller than the number of men, single-aged male, military-aged male men. I guess that male would be man, but I don't know. Nowadays, everything's kind of like mixed up. You could be a man that thinks he's a woman. They're probably coming across the border too. Our border is wide open. We literally are watching our enemies utilize our border against our country. And we are being invaded as we speak. Every day, every night, on the weekends, on the holidays. People are pouring across the border. Drugs are pouring across the border. Bad guys and good guys and terrorists and anybody that you can think of has come across that border. And don't let this government or anyone else tell you any different. I have been down there too many times to know what is going on. And when we used to say every state is a border state, that is exactly what we mean. Because our nation, folks, you and I both know it, your neighborhoods, your schools, your hospitals, your trauma units are in the crosshairs of this war. And it is your children and your family that is paying the price. And it is an extraordinary price. And one that you can't even imagine yet the cost it is going to entail. What you see now is nothing compared to what will happen. And I have someone here that is going to explain that all to you and then give you the tools, I believe, to fight back. I'm joined today by former Director of Special Operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration, my good friend Derek Maltz, and we are going to be diving into all the latest numbers in a conversation that you don't want to miss. And we will also be in Arizona. Yes, we will be in Arizona with Tom Homan, Mark Morgan, Jason Jones, and Rodney Scott and Victor Avila. Yes, all 7 of us, part of the Border 911 team in Arizona this coming week with Turning Point USA. But before I get to Derek Maltz, let me tell you about MyPillow. MyPillow is excited to bring you their biggest bedding sale ever. Yes, Mike Lindell, he knows how to do this. He knows how to get you and get you in and get you supporting American products. And it's just in time for Christmas giving. And yes, I do get these for my children. They love it. I love giving them sheets and towels and all the good stuff that they need, especially for those that have already moved out of the house. Biggest bedding sale of the year, extending their money back guarantee for Christmas until March 1st, 2024. And guess what? We've got the Giza Dream bed sheets as low as $29.98. We get a set of all my pillowcases, only $9.98. Rejuvenate your bed with MyPillow mattress toppers for as low as, listen to this, $99.99. You just can't beat that. Give duvets, quilts, down comforters, body pillows, and so much more. Visit mypillow.com/Carter, that's CARTER, and enter code Carter, CARTER at checkout for big discounts, including the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98. Go to mypillow.com/Carter, code Carter, mypillow.com/Carter, code Carter, or call 1-800-685-7221. Again, we have our very special guest, somebody who I love to come on the show and just give us the latest updates on everything, and who is a partner, I won't say in crime, of mine, Derek Maltz, a former director of special operations for the Special Operations Division under the DOJ and DEA, and now with me as a board member of Border 911. He is not just that, he's a friend and probably one of the people in the nation that I respect the most. Thank you so much, Derek, for waiting for me and for being on the Sara Carter Show.
Thank you, Sara. It's always a pleasure talking to you about these topics because I know you understand them very well. You've been covering these topics for so many years. Prior to you getting on, I was just talking to the guys about your film, Not in Vain, and how you were so far ahead of everybody in the media, talking about poisoning from China and the wide open border and the cartels and the problems. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. I mean, if it wasn't for people like you, Derek, who are on the front lines of this battle every single day and who opened my eyes so many years ago as to the problems that we would be facing in the future. A lot of times people say to me, it's almost as if you had, sight. It's almost as if you had some kind of magic to see what was going to happen in the future. I said, no, it was the evidence that was right before me when I was covering the border nearly 20 years ago. We were watching what was happening. We were watching the drug cartels, and their movements, and especially the DEA, the men and the women of the DEA who put everything on the front line to target some of the worst people on planet Earth, and stop their operations. I mean, this is not for the faint-hearted. I mean, Derek, this is a real war that happens behind the scenes, and you were a part of that war. You still are to this day, and you're fighting for our country and fighting for our children. When you think back on it, you think back 20 years ago, and all the warnings that the DEA was throwing out there, as well as CIA officers who were working on the front lines in Central America. What goes through your mind when you see what's happened, what's transpired?
Well, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is after 9/11, how the DEA started, ramping up their efforts to go after the terrorists because they were all tapping into the crime and the criminal proceeds to fund their radical operations. And one thing that's very clear in my brain is Project Cassandra, because we saw this unbelievable connection between Hezbollah and the Mexican cartels, and they were running a multi-billion-dollar trade-based money laundering scheme. And now to see what's going on in this country with the wide open border and the Quds Force operatives that are probably already in our country that came over the border because they want to decimate America, it's quite scary. When you look at the connectivity between the really radical terrorists and these criminal groups that operate, throughout Mexico and other areas of Central America, South America, it's really alarming to think that, all these years later, look at the situation we're in now.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And I want everybody to understand what Derek's talking about right now. It was Project Cassandra. It was under the Department of Justice. It was 2008, if I'm not mistaken, when the DEA launched that operation. And you had evidence that Hezbollah was basically was working inside the United States. I mean, there was investigators believe that there was literally $1 billion a year from drug and weapons trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities that was happening inside the United States. The story broke really big on Politico. It was a great story, and I'm trying to remember the name of the writer right now, and it's slipping my mind. Josh Meyer. That's it, Josh Meyer. And it was basically how Obama let Hezbollah go, how Obama let Hezbollah off the hook because of the JCPOA deal. And it was because the Obama administration was so focused on cutting a nuclear deal with Iran that the Obama administration chose to turn a blind eye to actual criminal activity that was happening in the United States that was targeting Americans, right?
Right,
And moving money
exactly.
to these groups.
And Sarah, just on that note, I want to just highlight something. Like, obviously, after the war in 2006, right, Hezbollah depleted a lot of their resources, so they needed to build up a cash flow. And that's why they got very involved with this trade-based money laundering scheme, selling drugs around the world and moving money for the cartels. And they needed to get the cash going so they could continue fighting not only against Israel, but in Syria, as another example, right? They had to buy all these new weapons and rockets and everything else. But when you look at even the synthetic drugs and you look at all the groups from Yemen that have been operating forever in America at gas stations, bodegas, convenience stores, selling K2 spice, that was coming out of China, by the way, during Project Synergy, we've talked about this before. And then they're sending money back to support Hezbollah and the Houthis inside of Yemen. Well, isn't it ironic now? We've been already hit how many times? 92 times over the last 6 weeks or whatever it is by these radicals down there in Yemen. And so all the monies that they generated from America, selling, synthetic drugs and illegal cigarettes and stealing money from our welfare system has been forwarded down to Yemen to support these radical terrorists. We were talking about that since 2010.
There were two things there that are really important that you said, that you brought up. One is, let's look at the timeline. We're going all the way back, right? And you started to investigate this, which was Project Cassandra in 2008, but it goes much further back than that. And I remember when I was originally breaking a lot of the stories, Derek, at the Washington Times, and I was talking about this nexus between the drug cartels and the terrorist organizations, and then the DEA, the chiefs, the heads then of the DEA and the Obama administration kind of came after me. What were you seeing behind the scenes at that point in time? Why didn't they want the public to know?
Well, it's the same reason why we weren't getting the proper support on Project Cassandra. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to think that we identified Hezbollah's growing connection with the Mexican cartels, and they were generating billions of dollars a year to build up capabilities as the most technically capable terrorist organization in the world. And we weren't getting supported by our own government. So they didn't want to hear the truth, just like now they don't want to hear the truth. They're censoring people's voices all over the place. Sarah, I put a YouTube video up the other day on my interview with Amanda Head on Real America's Voice about fentanyl poisonings, and they shut it down. They took it off the YouTube, said it wasn't age appropriate. We're trying to save the kids, and they're saying it's not age appropriate.
Well, that's what they've been doing to me, and I have been stunned at what is happening on YouTube. I've been demonetized on YouTube. I have been shadow banned on YouTube. Hezbollah, Hamas, all these other organizations, have videos out there. One of them, which I retweeted, I think it might be a Hamas video. It might not be Hezbollah, but I retweeted the fact that it had already 1.2 million views. It's been up for over 8 hours. It was never demonetized by YouTube. They come after us for telling the truth. I was demonetized for exposing China and other various issues that dealt with fentanyl. So what do you think is going on here that these companies, Google and others, are demonetizing us, are removing our videos, but not removing those?
Well, I would just say, welcome to Joe Biden's America. That's what's happening. It's changing quickly. Things don't make sense anymore. Like, look at our elementary schools where they think it's okay to talk to a 7, 8, 9-year-old about a transgender surgery without telling the parents. Like, this is lunacy. Like, we can go on all day. But going back to the crime and terror story, Sarah, I want you to know a couple of things. First of all, the administrator of DEA back in the day, Karen Tandy and Mike Braun, they started up a whole counter-narco-terrorism operation capability for DEA because they knew there was so much connectivity between the terrorists and the drug traffickers. So I'm sure some of the friction that you started feeling was coming from the Obama administration, because the people that started this new increased DEA presence in the world against terrorists, they were gone by the time you started getting the kickback. But I still have the video when you were breaking one of these stories as a Washington Times reporter, as you know, talking about things that if you play it back now, you were dead on. You were 100% right.
And I think that's what just is so mind blowing to me, Derek, is that I know it was because of the men and women at the DEA, the men and women on the front lines of terror with the CIA overseas, and others who were involved in investigations, even with the FBI overseas, that you guys were all on the front lines of this, putting everything on the line, putting your lives on the line, putting your lives at risk. And our government was working against you, not against the terrorists at that time, but against its very own bureaucracy that was doing exactly what it was meant to do, which was to stop these bad guys from attaining any access inside the United States and targeting Americans and targeting our assets. But you were being punished for it. And that's what I just can't get over, even to the point where you knew that Iran had Quds Force sleeper cell connections inside the United States, and the Obama administration was willing to turn its head, turn a blind eye to what was happening here.
Right, and don't forget, we had, like, for example, Ali Fayed in custody overseas, and
Right.
he was charged in America with conspiracy to kill Americans, and they let him get out. They let him go back to Lebanon. There was no, influence by our government at the time. They also let Walid Makhled from Venezuela, who was deeply embedded with the highest levels of the Chavez government. They also let General Carvajal go back from Aruba when we arrested him. So they weren't even, sending these characters to America to face justice. So it's kind of mind-boggling. But now what I know today, and I see what's going on today, it's like it's very clear. Like they just don't want to protect Americans. That's just the bottom line, and I can't explain why.
Yeah, me neither. And I think this is what we're up against. We're up against a beast, right? That's why we formed with Tom Homan, Border 911. We've got Mark Morgan on our team, Rodney Scott, former chief of the Border Patrol, Victor Avila, who survived, was with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He's brilliant. He survived a horrific attack on his life. By the grace of God, he survived that. Express VPN. I love it. I have it. It lets me know that I am being protected. This Christmas, as you're pounding down potatoes and gravy, I want you to think about everything you've looked at on your phone in the last few days. Well, guess what? Who is in charge of the Wi-Fi you've been enjoying all of that content on? Is it your dad? Is it your sister-in-law? Your grandmother? Well, guess what? That person has access to all the websites you've been looking at, unless you do what I do and use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app I have on my phone and computer that encrypts all of my online traffic. So whatever I do stays private. Right now, get ExpressVPN's special holiday offer. Go to expressvpn.com/SARA right now, and you can get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/SARA, expressvpn.com/Sara to learn more. And right now we're looking at the border, and we've got, according to Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens, there were 20,000 plus encounters at the US-Mexico border just last weekend. And among them, they had sex offenders, gang members, God only knows what else, and a lot more that just disappeared. Why do you think the government is like, oh no, we don't have anything to worry about? These folks came in, but we don't have any terrorists coming into the country. Like, you got to be sadly mistaken.
So, Sara, just ask the question, why would any reasonable person reverse the sound policies that the previous administration put in to secure the border? Why would they want to do that? Right now, as you know very well, historic fentanyl deaths, historic seizures by law enforcement, historic profits by the cartels, historic cartel-controlled human smuggling, sex trafficking operations, historic illegals entering the country, historic unknowns coming into the country, and by the way, historic bills for legal and law-abiding citizens. So this is the destruction of America, but yet the government is facilitating all this activity. And look at all these families that are being destroyed because of the deadly fentanyl. I mean, it's ridiculous. So these are things that we can't really answer with logical, answers, because it doesn't make sense, right?
And they get mad at us, Derek, and they get mad at us when we point it out. And let me say something to you. If there was an enemy, and I've asked this question to my husband and others in the military and others who have served our nation, in various capacities, from the FBI to the DEA. If an enemy entered our country and did what our government is doing to us, it would feel like an act of war. But our own government is doing this to us. And we're supposed to sit silent and be like, you know, that's okay. We can't challenge this government, because if we do, we become the domestic extremist.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing that's mind-boggling. But you would think, and I always say, like, this isn't really a red or a blue issue. It's a red, white, and blue issue, because every
Right.
American's impacted. Every American should unite and get pissed off because they're killing our kids. They're killing our future military officers. They're killing record levels of not only children, but our military is dying at record levels from fentanyl poisoning. So it's a chemical weapon attack by China. They're working clearly with the cartels. They're exploiting the weaknesses at the border. They're coming into our country, setting up marijuana grow operations. They're involved with massive money laundering for the cartels, providing all the chemicals to the cartels. So their role, the Chinese criminals that, by the way, Director Wray says is our biggest national security threat, but yet they're coming into the country at record levels, the illegals. They went from 342 in 2021 to last year in fiscal year 23 to 24,125. They're coming in, military-age men, setting up operations, doing counterintelligence, and God only knows what else they're doing. But the government of America is facilitating it. And, it's a disgrace, like coming from New York, like Mayor Adams has been on, the train putting out videos, all his trips to D.C., trying to talk about how this is destroying New York City. No, it's destroying America. And that's the point that I don't understand. Like, it's not just New York. It's everywhere. And it's just going to continue because so many unknowns are already here.
Yeah, and that's what I'm so worried about. I'm so worried, Derek, that we are going to wake up one day, we're not going to have a nation anymore, because we have just sat back. It's like we're not allowed to challenge our government anymore. And I don't understand how this evolved so rapidly. It did during COVID, but it's like we can't even speak up. We speak up, and all of a sudden we're ostracized. We're like an element of anti-Americanism. They want to associate anybody who challenges the Biden administration or the Obama administration as some kind of Russian stooge, which is so bizarre and weird in and of itself. It's like we're not allowed to stand up and say, wait a minute, I don't want this happening to my country. I was looking at a story right now because you brought up our military and fentanyl, and the Washington Post actually did a story in June of this year, talking about how fentanyl is becoming an extraordinary problem in our military across the board. And it was saying that the Army had lost, and this is only based on numbers that they had. They think it's so much higher than this. 127 soldiers to fentanyl between 2015 and 2022. And that was according to records that the Post obtained through a Freedom of Information Act. That's more than double the number of Army personnel killed in combat in Afghanistan during that same period. At least 27 soldiers died from fentanyl in 2021, the Army's deadliest year yet. But in February, when asked by senators for statistics on fentanyl overdoses, Pentagon officials reported a number that was half of the figure contained in the records. So they even lied about it before Congress. Like, the Post got the records and the Pentagon lied about how many people were dying. And you and I both know that those numbers aren't even accurate in and of themselves.
Right. So, like, that's one of my big beefs lately, Sarah, is like Department of Education, CDC has failed miserably, because like when COVID was going on, every night we saw COVID cases, COVID deaths, not only in America, but around the world, right? Now we have no idea to even address the fentanyl problem. We don't even know how many poisonings occurred in America, because we don't keep statistics at a national level on how many people were actually poisoned, but the EMS, revived them from Narcan, right? Wouldn't that be an important statistic so you can assess the magnitude of the problem? And then when you look at little things, like, because I track this stuff every day, Sarah. So you had December 11th, 2 dead in a car in Vienna Township, Michigan, 2 dead in a home shut down in Knoxville because they had all these incidents with drugs. Thanksgiving Day in Battle Creek, Michigan, 10 poisoned in one house. Thanksgiving week, 4 dead on the streets of Denver from fentanyl poisoning. Then you had in Harrisburg in September, 18 poisoned and 9 or 10 dead. The problem is we can't even get accurate statistics. Nobody's connecting the dots between all these incidents, the Chinese coming in, the cartels operating with impunity at the border. It's like everyone is like missing the bigger picture. We're under attack. Wake the hell up.
We are. We are literally under attack. And the facilitator of this attack is not just China. It's not our enemies or our adversaries. It's the people up in Washington, D.C., who are sitting there opening our border wide open, not even caring about what the American people are facing or the deaths of our children. I wanted to read this to you and get your take on this because this is right up your alley. You know, they talk about this being another massive wave of people that will mostly be simply released into the country. And I was talking about that 20,000 that we just talked about, a small number, right? We're going to have nearly, I think, 10 to 15 million by the end of Biden. And that includes the known gotaways. And is it fair to say that we are a nation without borders? Because Chief Owens also tweeted this last week. The Border Patrol had recovered over $6 million worth of dangerous drugs just in that area. 4,165 pounds of marijuana, 328 pounds of meth, 123 pounds of cocaine, 32 pounds of fentanyl, 8 firearms. And that's just in that one small, tiny little period. One little tiny period. We don't even know how much is coming in.
We don't have a border. I mean, the DEA just put out the stats through the end of November. They've already seized 74.5 million fake pills and over 11,000 pounds with their partners in America. You know, we know that last year CBP seized 27,000 pounds of fentanyl at the border. So, like, this is just out of control. The production in Mexico is off the charts. Sarah, one other thing I wanted to mention, because I'm not sure if you knew this, I went to the largest ever international drug enforcement conference hosted by the DEA in Jamaica in September. And they had all these countries there willing to cooperate, collaborate, work together to go after these drug traffickers. And guess what country did not show up? Mexico. So why is it and how is it possible that this administration, you know, Biden can get on TV and say he's going to do everything in his power to actually go after this fentanyl problem? Meanwhile, he has a wide open border. So he's facilitated the cartel's ability to kill Americans. And Mexico doesn't show up, but our State Department's still giving them billions of dollars because they're this great southern border partner, okay? Meanwhile, the reason they didn't show up, in my opinion, is because they also came out with a study recently that the cartels are the 5th largest business operation in Mexico. So why would these corrupt leaders in Mexico want to shut down their 5th largest business that's paying them big money? Like, doesn't make sense why they'd want to shut that down. But the fact that they didn't show up to our meeting in Mexico, that DEA administrator was up there showing all the dead kids in the Faces of Fentanyl exhibit, and Mexico just kicks sand in our face and doesn't show up, that's something to me that crosses that line in the sand. That would be unacceptable.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's almost as if it is set up that way, Derek. And you and I both know that the money that the cartels are making far resource what our law enforcement officials have on the border to deal with them, even our DEA. It's like, how do we even keep up with the cartels when they have hundreds of billions of dollars amassed in narcotics and money laundering and God only knows what else, human organ trafficking, human trafficking. We can talk about the most sadistic things on planet Earth, and our government does nothing for it. They must be buying people on our side of the border too. I don't buy it that only the Mexicans are on the take. I think if we did a thorough house cleaning in America, we would find quite a few people with big bank accounts overseas where they have funneled money from the drug cartels and they are assisting the drug cartels as well.
Right. I mean, you always follow the money, right? That's what they say in law enforcement. You always follow the money. Well, look at the big pharma disaster in America and how they went untouchable for so many years. They dumped 100 billion opioids into America in a 9-year period. Every time the DEA wanted to go do a high-level prosecution on the manufacturers and distributors of these pharmaceutical drugs, these legitimate drugs, what happened? They were shut down. Why were they shut down? Because it's all about the money. Because the lawyers that were responsible to help do the prosecutions wanted jobs in the private sector when they left government, and they didn't want their names tainted as the prosecutor that went against the big money, the big operations that are funding all these presidential campaigns. That's corruption at the max, Sarah. So it's not just Mexico and Central America and South America. It is right here in our country, because if you look at the current crisis we have, it's been totally, increased over the years because of the legitimate pharmaceuticals companies dumping all these drugs in our citizens' hands all over the communities of this country. So there's a lot of corruption on that side too.
Again, thank you, Derek, so much for coming on the show. I can't wait for everyone to hear part 2 of my interview with you for tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you this coming weekend in Arizona. Folks, if you enjoyed today's conversation with Derek Maltz, please come back for part 2 tomorrow. Please make sure you subscribe to the Sara Carter Show here on your favorite podcast app. It really does help us. Give us that 5-star review, right? I read all of your reviews. It means a lot to me. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God bless the upcoming presidential elections, that we put someone in office who actually cares about this nation and us. And God bless the great state of Texas.